Have you ever walked into a room where every eye that once looked down on you suddenly fell silent, unable to utter a single word? Have you ever dreamed of returning, not to receive applause and praise, but to pull the one standing at the top straight down into the abyss? This is not a story from a movie. This is a true story about a woman who was once invisible in her classroom, an outsider whose name no one remembered, whose existence no one cared about. 20 years later, in a grand hall where those same people gathered, she was no longer the faint shadow of the past. She became the one thing that the entire room could no longer control. And the man who once ruled the crowd, Daniel Crow, a financial billionaire glorified by the media, could only force a smile as agents surrounded him. It was he who, in the face of her chilling silence, finally admitted, "This world belongs to those smart enough to break the rules, and you are the only one who dared to break mine." But the moment she handcuffed him in front of hundreds of stunned faces was not the end. It was only the beginning of a far greater battle, a battle between truth and the most sophisticated lies of the modern world. What about you? If it were you standing in that room, where those who once looked down on you now bowed their heads in silence, would you forgive, or would you coldly end it all? Tell me where you're from and how this story touched your heart. And don't forget to hit subscribe to follow the full journey of Eleanor Shaw, the woman who redefined what true power means. Eleanor Shaw stood before the mirror, her dark brown eyes reflecting a strange coldness. The ash-gray dress hugged her figure, both modest and sharp, not flashy, not seductive, and perfectly suited for the role she chose tonight, an ordinary person. She adjusted her cuffs, each movement as precise as if programmed. Behind her, the wall clock ticked steadily, the only sound breaking the silence of the 34th floor hotel room. From the window, the city lights spilled in, glinting off the first strands of gray in her hair. A Saturday night, a class reunion. Eleanor still didn't understand why she agreed to attend. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, from a name she no longer remembered, probably the head of the organizing group. A simple email attached with an old high school photo with a subject line that read, "20 years. Is it enough for us to laugh together now?" No, it wasn't enough. She still remembered the laughter hissed through clenched teeth. The glances were cast at her worn-out shoes. The lunches were eaten alone in the library, pretending to be engrossed in books just to avoid pitiful stares. Teenage Eleanor had nothing but silence, textbooks, and ears burning with shame. It had taken her nearly 20 years to gradually erase those memories, and now she was about to face them again, with absolute clarity. She turned toward the desk. The black leather case lay open, revealing a thick ivory envelope stamped "classified" in red ink. It had been handed to her exactly 2 hours ago by Agent Geller, senior security aide. No one in this hotel room knew about that meeting. No one was allowed to know. Eleanor put on thin gloves and carefully opened the file. Inside were photos, maps, and a string of financial data. She didn't need to read it all to understand. The target was there. His name, Daniel Crow. Public profession, investment consultant, and motivational speaker. Actual operations, mastermind of a transnational money laundering network linked to illegal funding of political campaigns and private military organizations in the Middle East. Eleanor had been tracking him for nearly 3 years. He always vanished just before the net closed in, but this time an anonymous source confirmed Crow would appear at the reunion posing as a successful alumnus to reconnect with old contacts. This was no longer an innocent gathering, this was a chess game, and she, the girl once mocked by the class, was now the final player holding the upper hand. She placed the file back into the safe, entered a 2-layer security code, then stood up. Her phone vibrated softly. A message had arrived. No sender name, no identification, just a single line on the glowing screen. "They still think you're a failure." Eleanor's heart tightened for a beat. She stared at the message, then gently swiped it away. She didn't know who sent it. It could have been one of her agents. It could have been someone watching her. Or perhaps it was him, Crow. But those words hit the deepest part of her. Those people, those former classmates, had they changed? Did they still remember the day she was caught sneaking leftover bread into class? Did they still whisper about the name Invisible Eleanor, the nickname they gave her, because no one knew what she did, what she thought, or whether she felt anything at all? She had left high school like a shadow. No accolades, no regrets, no farewells. 20 years later, she had become the Director of National Intelligence, a position most people didn't even know existed. And even if they did, they were not permitted to speak her name publicly. Her identity was part of the nation's defense structure, but that also meant no one at the reunion knew who she had become. They still thought she was just an office clerk, living alone, fading into the background. They would laugh at her for not being married, for not having children, for not being on social media, for having nothing that fit their definition of success. And tonight, Eleanor would stand among them, silent, watching, and striking. She opened the metal cabinet, taking out a small wooden box. Inside was a gold-plated badge, the symbol of the National Intelligence Office. Under the light, the engraved motto became clear: "In silence, we see all." She looked at it once more, then placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and locked it. Tonight, that identity would not exist. She wasn't going there as a general, not as an official, not as someone who testified before Congress. She was going there as Eleanor Shaw, the girl once mocked for wearing torn shoes and eating lunch alone. The bell rang. Her car had arrived. She put on her coat, grabbed her bag, and checked her earpiece, disguised as a small earring. All devices were ready. All entrances had been checked by her undercover security team. Every emergency scenario was programmed in her mind like a high-stakes strategy game. But what she wasn't prepared for were the memories. Memories of the days when no one looked at her with respect. The days she dreamed of walking into a room and silencing everyone, not because of power, but because they realized they had been wrong. Eleanor stepped out of the room, walking down the long, red-carpeted hallway. In the elevator, she stood alone, looking at her reflection once more. Still the same face, expressionless, steady. But deep in her eyes was an old battle that had never ended. She took a deep breath and whispered into the sealed space, "This isn't for me. This is for the truth." The elevator doors opened. The lights of the Aspen Grove Hotel flooded her vision. Soft music from the ballroom drifted through the air. The party had begun. And Eleanor Shaw, the girl dismissed throughout her youth, had just stepped onto the final chessboard of her life. The first sound Eleanor heard as she stepped into the hall wasn't music, nor was it greetings. It was laughter, the familiar sound of smugness, from people who believed the world revolved around them. The ballroom of the Aspen Grove Hotel was decorated like an elite gala, not a simple class reunion. The ceiling soared high, with crystal chandeliers shining like stars. Red carpets stretched across the floor. Cocktail tables were adorned with imported wines and delicately plated hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor paused for a few seconds at the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd. They didn't recognize her. Or if they did, no one cared to look long enough. Familiar yet distant faces, now covered by the makeup of success, tailored suits, designer dresses, and expensive watches. They had aged, but their arrogant gaze remained unchanged. Eleanor walked slowly inside, stopping near a wine table. She poured herself a glass of red wine, holding it just steady enough, just casual enough to avoid drawing attention. Her earpiece was still active, picking up internal signals from surveillance teams positioned discreetly throughout the hotel. But no action orders have come through yet. Her first mission: observe. In the far left corner of the ballroom, a group clustered around a tall man, slicked back hair, a dazzling smile seemingly crafted for magazine covers. Tailored fit suit, navy silk tie, and a Mont Blanc pen tucked into his chest pocket. Daniel Crow. He was smiling, that confident smile of a man who owned the room without even trying. Daniel was recounting his recent trip to Davos, where he negotiated with major investment funds. He spoke endlessly about compound profits, ESG investment strategies, and wealth building in emerging markets, as if he alone understood how the world worked. The people around him, once the noisy kids of Class 11A, now laughed heartily and nodded along with every word. They didn't know, or didn't want to know, that beneath the facade of a successful entrepreneur was one of the most closely monitored individuals by international security agencies. Eleanor took a sip of wine. The slight bitterness slid down her throat, pulling old memories to the surface. Daniel Crow, once the ringleader of those who bullied her. He never laid a hand on anyone, but was the one who delivered the sharpest jokes, hidden behind his charming exterior and friendly smile. He knew how to hurt people with the softest words. And today, he was still the same. Only his stage had expanded to a global scale. A woman, probably Julia Thompson, approached Eleanor, her eyes half friendly, half curious. Julia had been the cheerleading captain and was now a marketing director at a major cosmetics company. "Eleanor, oh my God, it's been forever. I almost didn't recognize you," Julia greeted, her tone a mix of surprise and a hint of pity. "You're still doing all right? Where are you working now?" Eleanor gave a faint smile, maintaining a detached air. "Still working in an office, nothing special." "Oh!" Julia smiled brightly, but in her eyes flickered a strange relief, as if Eleanor remaining in her lowly place spared her from feeling threatened. "We all thought you'd become a professor or scientist or something. You were so quiet in school, everyone guessed that." The light remark felt like a sharp blade twisting inside. There was no need for outright mockery, just expressing surprise that she was still just an office worker after all these years. That was enough. Across the room, Daniel Crow suddenly turned and caught her gaze. He frowned for a split second, perhaps recognizing her, but immediately he offered a polite smile and nodded, as if she were just another faint acquaintance from the past. Eleanor didn't return the gesture. She turned away, but inside she noted Crow recognized her, and perhaps he already knew something. Another group of men approached, led by Peter Lynn, who, Nance the football team captain, is now a corporate lawyer. "Eleanor, oh Lord, didn't think you'd show up," Peter said loudly, giving her a casual pat on the shoulder, as if greeting an old relic from the past. "We even had a bet on whether you'd dare show your face. Who won?" He turned to laugh with his friends, as if she weren't standing right there. Eleanor smiled lightly, keeping her composure. "Well, whoever guessed I'd show up knows me." Peter burst into laughter. "Not me. You've always been mysterious, like some kind of spy." The group laughed along. Eleanor remained silent. If they only knew who she was, they wouldn't be laughing so easily. Another voice cut in from behind, lower, sharper. "Still working in an office, huh, Eleanor?" She turned. It was Richard Moore, who had been at the bottom of the class but later inherited enough to become the CEO of a mid-sized tech company. The same arrogant eyes, the same half-smile. His words sliced through the air, soft but stinging. Eleanor looked him straight in the eye and calmly replied, "Still the same. Unlike you, making CEO thanks to luck, right?" Her response silenced the group for a moment, then Peter laughed loudly to break the tension. "Still sharp as ever, Eleanor, but don't forget, we're here to celebrate, not to duel." She nodded, raising her glass. "Exactly, tonight's for celebration." And in her mind, she added, "Celebrating your smugness, right before it all comes crashing down." Eleanor stepped back toward the bar, pretending to order another drink. In truth, she was observing Crow chatting with several finance insiders, men whose names also appeared on intelligence watch lists. Her support team reported briefly through the earpiece. Crow just received an encrypted call from Panama. Confirmed, the money laundering operation is entering its final phase, but he's still calm. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. Calm, meaning he was very confident. Either he didn't know he was being watched, or worse, he knew and didn't care. The ballroom lights shifted to a warm, golden hue. The event host took the stage, introducing the segment featuring the successful alumni. And the first name, unsurprisingly, was called, "Please welcome Mr. Daniel Crow, Global Financial Strategy Consultant." The entire hall applauded. Daniel stepped onto the stage, his smile dazzling, like a king among his subjects. Eleanor tightened her grip on the wine glass. The party shifted into its next phase. Old games revived as a way to prolong the fake merriment. The host, a former classmate named Kevin, once the class clown, rallied the crowd to play Who's the Most Successful with loud laughter and crude jokes. On stage, the LED screen displayed a list of nominees chosen by the crowd. Daniel Crow led the list as the finance god, followed by Julia Thompson as the cosmetics queen, and Peter Lynch as the million-dollar lawyer. Eleanor's name wasn't there. Of course not. She stood quietly at the back of the hall, where the lighting was dimmer, listening to the rounds of applause and laughter that followed each boastful story. Daniel spoke of a billion-dollar deal in Singapore. Julia told of a global advertising campaign. Peter shared about the biggest lawsuit in New York last year. Everything seemed perfect, or at least they thought so. Eleanor took a sip of water. She didn't need more wine. Her mind had to stay sharp, now more than ever. In her earpiece, Agent Geller's voice came through, brief and direct. "The target is active. A transfer order is being initiated from an encrypted mobile device. Destination confirmed, an international bank in Zurich." Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment. The chessboard was in motion. Crow was transferring the final sum, the money that would complete his laundering chain. If he succeeded, the entire 3-year operation would be for nothing. But she couldn't act yet. An arrest now would panic everyone in the room. She would lose her cover, and worse, other links in Crow's network would be alerted and disappear. She looked toward the stage. Daniel was raising a plastic trophy high, laughing as if he had just won a Nobel Prize. "Thank you for the recognition. But you know, I'm just someone who knows how to seize opportunities," he said, his tone laced with false humility. The applause roared, admiring gazes, approving smiles. Eleanor quietly clenched her fist. This was what made him dangerous. Crow didn't force people to follow him. He made them want to trust him. The crowd dispersed, moving on to the next game. Share a secret no one in class had ever heard. Kevin shouted, "Time to be honest, my angels. Who's going first?" Julia stepped up, smiling charmingly, and confessed that she once swapped her French test answers in 12th grade. Laughter erupted. No one treated it as a serious offense. Peter took the mic next, revealing that he once had a crush on their chemistry teacher. More cheers and playful boos. Crow quietly stepped back, not joining in. He never exposed his weaknesses, not even in a harmless game. Eleanor knew what that meant. Crow didn't see this as a party. For him, it was a battlefield, just like it was for her. Laughter continued to echo, an absurd soundtrack to the silent psychological war being waged beneath the surface. Eleanor wondered, should she end this now? One signal and the agents could storm in, lock down the hall, arrest Crow, and seize his device immediately. But she hesitated. Was it too soon? Had he prepared a backup plan? Or was this just the surface, and someone else was pulling the strings from behind? The silence in her mind stretched, heavy and cold. Eleanor wasn't accustomed to hesitation, but this time she couldn't afford to be wrong. Geller's voice crackled again. "Transfer completes in 30 minutes. We're in the final window. 30 minutes left. She needed to decide soon." At that moment, a woman approached her. The light reflected off pale blonde hair, a familiar face, though Eleanor couldn't recall her name. Probably Sarah, the quiet girl from the front row in school. "Eleanor," Sarah said gently, without the mockery others had shown. "It's been a long time. I always thought you were someone who listened well." Eleanor paused, slightly taken aback. Those words didn't resemble anything she'd heard in this room. They weren't sarcastic, but they weren't exactly warm either. Simply an observation. A compliment? A reminder? A test? She replied with a faint smile. "Thanks. Quiet people tend to hear more." Sarah nodded, her gaze calm and unreadable. Then she turned and melted back into the crowd. Eleanor watched her go, briefly unsettled. Was Sarah another outsider like her, or just someone playing the role of kindness to mask a hidden agenda? She didn't have time to analyze further. On stage, Kevin called out again, now for a little challenge. Who will share the biggest failure of their life? The more painful, the better. The crowd roared with laughter, pushing one another toward the front. No one wanted to go. No one truly wanted to relive their failures. Eleanor watched closely. This was the moment when people revealed their truest selves, when forced to talk about defeat. Daniel stepped up, mic in hand, his smile unchanged. My biggest failure? He paused, as if recalling something deep. Probably the time I thought I needed other people's approval to succeed. The whole room laughed. A perfect answer, deep enough to sound sincere, smart enough to reveal nothing. Eleanor gave a faint, bitter smile. He played the game too well. She checked the signal again. The intelligence team reported, Crow just sent the final confirmation. GPS confirms the device is still inside the hall. The receiving account in Zurich is ready. She tightened her grip on the water glass. Only one step remained. If she didn't cut it now, the money would move and vanish forever beyond reach. But if she cut it now, she would lose the chance to trace the recipients in Zurich. The system would only catch Crow, but the people behind him would still be free. Eleanor took a deep breath. The decision couldn't be rushed. In that moment, she recalled her old mentor's words. The best predator isn't the one who strikes first. It's the one who waits until the very last second. She had 10 minutes left. 10 minutes to see if Crow slipped. 10 minutes to watch for anyone else revealing themselves. 10 minutes to set the perfect trap. Across the room, Crow returned to his table, lifted his wine glass, and glanced at Eleanor once again. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, two players acknowledging the next move. Crow smiled faintly, raising his glass as if in a toast. Eleanor met his gaze with calm stillness. Tonight the game wasn't over, but her time was running out. The atmosphere of the cocktail party softened. The loud games faded away, giving space to smaller conversations around the cocktail tables. Smooth jazz played in the background like a veil covering the quiet tension between people who were no longer the carefree students of 20 years ago. Eleanor quietly moved among the small groups, keeping just enough distance to avoid attention, but close enough to listen in. Daniel Crow stood by the bar, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of scotch. He was speaking with three middle-aged men, faces Eleanor recognized from financial dossiers, an investment banking CEO, an international real estate broker, and a venture capital fund chairman. All men who knew how to slip through the cracks of the law. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadied her pulse, and walked directly toward Crow. No more waiting, no more hiding. It was time for her to step onto the chessboard. Crow noticed her first. He turned, his smile polite to the point of being fake. Eleanor Shaw, I didn't expect you to come speak with me, he began, his tone light as a breeze, but his eyes sharp and appraising. Eleanor answered with a deliberately naive smile. I was just curious. Everyone says you're so successful, but honestly, I still don't quite understand. What is it exactly that you do, Daniel? She purposely downplayed herself, like a girl who didn't know much about the financial world. Crow laughed, a laugh that was both friendly and condescending. Oh, I just help visionaries turn dreams into reality, he replied, swirling his glass. Sounds like something out of a self-help book, Eleanor said lightly, maintaining her innocent demeanor. But what exactly does that mean? Crow tilted his head as if weighing how much to reveal. Strategic investments, Eleanor. Putting money in the right place at the right time and getting back more than you put in. Sometimes real estate, sometimes tech, sometimes areas most people overlook. He paused briefly, watching her reaction. Eleanor kept her expression calm, like someone who didn't fully understand but wasn't overly concerned. So, do you ever invest in charity? Eleanor asked softly. Crow paused slightly, then let out a big laugh. You're full of surprises. I've been looking for a community project with potential reach. These days, if you want to build an image, you can't ignore social initiatives. Eleanor tilted her head, feigning surprise. You care about image? I thought someone like you only cared about numbers. Crow smiled, sipping his scotch. Sometimes an image is a number. Don't you think so? She stayed silent, as if contemplating his answer. Crow set his glass down on the bar, his smile softening as he looked directly at her. I was just thinking about you, Eleanor. I heard you're involved in some community education work. Eleanor nodded slightly. Indeed, recently, as part of her cover, she'd lent her name to a rural education fund, a front for intelligence-backed outreach to social groups. Yes, but it's small, just helping a few schools in remote areas. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Crow smiled warmly, strangely so. Something that seems small but has a big impact when leveraged correctly. Eleanor looked at him, feigning confusion. What are you planning to do? Crow leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. I want to sponsor your project, not for publicity, simply because I see potential. Someone like you, humble, quiet, not seeking attention, is the perfect brand ambassador. Eleanor stayed silent for a few seconds. She knew this wasn't kindness. This was a bribe. Crow didn't simply want to donate. He wanted to control her, to turn her into a tool to launder his dirty money through social projects, a sophisticated and clean laundering tactic. She set her glass down and looked him straight in the eye. And what do I get out of this? She asked bluntly, no longer playing naive. Crow laughed loudly, as if she'd told a joke. Eleanor, sometimes the question isn't what you gain, but what you avoid. A project like this helps keep people from asking where the funding comes from, why it exists, or what connections you might have outside your day job. That wasn't just an offer, it was a warning. Eleanor clenched her hands slightly, but stayed calm. She'd encountered plenty like him, men who extended a hand with a smile while hiding a knife in the other, ready to strike. She smiled faintly. I'll think about it. Crow nodded, satisfied. He didn't need an answer now. He only needed to plant the seed of doubt and control. In her earpiece, Geller's voice came through. Transfer order confirmed. Funds are en route to Zurich, but Crow doesn't seem to be leaving yet, likely waiting for final confirmation from the recipient. Eleanor knew this was the critical window. Crow was prolonging the conversation not just to manipulate her, but also to buy time, waiting for the all clear from the other end. Crow leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper beneath the soft music. This world, Eleanor, the smart ones don't play by others' rules. It wasn't just a philosophical quip. It was a confession. Crow didn't play by the rules. He made his own and forced others to live by them. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. That sentence was the end of hesitation. She knew, from this moment, the game was no longer about who was right or wrong. It was about who controlled the final rules. She looked at him, her smile light as air. Then I'll write my own rules. Crow laughed heartily, as if she'd just confirmed exactly what he hoped to hear. Around them, the party continued, glasses clinking, boastful stories shared, fake handshakes exchanged. But between Eleanor and Crow, the real game had just begun. The microphone crackled softly, and a hush gradually spread across the hall. Daniel Crow stepped onto the stage, his steps steady, his smile shining as bright as the spotlight on his face. No one had invited him to speak, but no one stopped him either. To the people in this room, Crow embodied success, the kind of success they craved, admired, and secretly envied. He swept his gaze across the crowd like an emperor surveying his domain, then slowly lifted the microphone. "My dear old friends," he began, his voice warm and smooth, polished from countless speeches. "It's strange, isn't it? 20 years later, I find myself here, in the very place where someone once told me I'd never amount to anything." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, while others nodded knowingly, as if sympathizing with the fallen king who had risen again. Crow continued, a gleam of pride in his eyes. "In high school, I wasn't the brightest student, nor the teacher's favorite, but I learned something no textbook ever taught. The world doesn't wait for you to be ready. It waits for whoever dares to take it." Scattered applause followed. A few had drunk enough to miss the arrogance in his words. At the back of the room, Eleanor watched every movement, her gaze cold. In her earpiece, Geller's voice came through. "Team 1 is in position on the 3rd floor. Team 2 is ready at the emergency exit. But Eleanor, we still don't have enough evidence to authorize the arrest." She tightened her grip on the glass of water, frustration creeping in. Crow hadn't exposed a single weakness. The funds had been transferred, but the origin and control mechanisms were still just speculation. If they arrested him now, the case would be spun into a political drama. Worse, he'd be released within 48 hours for lack of evidence. She needed more time, but Crow, through this speech, was turning the class reunion into his stage, reinforcing his image as a self-made hero. Crow raised a glass of wine, handed to him from the crowd. "We all have a past. Some wear it proudly, some run from it. As for me, I choose to turn it into a springboard." He paused briefly, then smiled casually. "Perhaps some of you didn't know, but I was once suspended for cheating on a math exam in 11th grade." The hall fell silent. People recalled the long-forgotten incident, and now its protagonist was laying it bare. From the left side of the room, an older but clear voice broke the silence. "Do you still remember why I suspended you, Crow?" All heads turned. It was Mr. Johnson, their former math teacher, the only person who had once dared to challenge Crow's arrogance. Crow turned toward him, his smile unwavering. "Of course I remember, sir," he replied, his tone that of a victor graciously greeting a defeated rival. "That was the day I learned my first lesson about power." He emphasized the word power, his gaze sweeping the room like a declaration of ownership. Mr. Johnson gripped the armrest of his chair, his disappointment unmistakable. "Power is not something to cover up your wrongs, Crow." But Crow only laughed, a booming, echoing laugh. "No, sir, power is the ability to make others accept your wrongs as inevitable." His laughter drowned out everything else. Eleanor felt the air grow heavy. Some bowed their heads, others laughed awkwardly. Only Crow remained calm, confident, as if he had just delivered a blow to the room's collective morality. Her earpiece crackled urgently. "Secondary target just appeared at the back exit, likely the one confirming the final transfer from Zurich." Eleanor cursed under her breath. That was the missing piece, the one confirming the transaction. If they caught him, it would all be over. But delay even a few minutes, and he'd slip away like before. She looked at Crow. He knew she was watching, and he wasn't afraid. Crow lowered the microphone. "Thank you for listening, but I believe the past should stay asleep. The present and the future belong to those who dare to break it." He stepped down from the stage. Scattered applause followed, weak but unopposed. Eleanor pressed her earpiece and gave the order. "Team 2, move in, arrest the secondary target at the back exit. Team 3, keep shadowing Crow, don't engage yet, not enough." She took a deep breath. The match wasn't over yet. Crow approached the bar where Eleanor stood. He smiled lightly. "What did you think of my speech?" Eleanor replied evenly. "Seems you're very confident about breaking the rules." Crow shrugged. "This world isn't for blind rule followers, Eleanor." She said nothing, her eyes fixed on him. He leaned in as if sharing a secret. "We're more alike than you think. The only difference is, I admit it." Then he turned away, leaving her alone with thoughts she hadn't yet sorted out. Her earpiece crackled again. Secondary target secured. Confirmation data found on the mobile device. Decrypting now, awaiting orders. Eleanor exhaled, relieved but still cautious. The evidence was coming together, but Crow was still standing there as if everything was unfolding according to his plan. He wasn't rushing to leave. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't running. Eleanor knew men like him only left once they'd finished their final act. Among the confused crowd, a few old classmates approached Crow, shaking his hand, praising his inspiring speech. Eleanor watched them, wondering how many of them knew the truth, and how many simply didn't care. Tonight, Crow had removed the mask of morality, but he still wore the crown of power. And Eleanor, though close to victory, could not yet declare the game over. The energy in the hall had quieted. The loud laughter of earlier in the evening gave way to sidelong glances and whispered conversations in shadowed corners. No one said it aloud, but tension had crept into every breath, every glance. Some people began to sense that something wasn't right. They couldn't name it, but instinct warned them. This room was no longer just a cheerful class reunion. Eleanor stood near the bar, scanning the clusters of people. Laughter now felt forced and thin. A few pairs of eyes flicked toward her, quickly turning away when they met her steady gaze. Who is she anyway? I don't remember her being like that back in school. She used to be so quiet, no one hung out with her. Now, there's something cold about her. I heard someone say she works for the government, but she doesn't look like a successful person. Eleanor didn't need to hear the full sentences to know their meaning. The whispers, the suspicion, and the discomfort that arose when someone they once dismissed no longer fit into their old assumptions. But she didn't care. Because in her earpiece, Agent Geller delivered a critical update. Confirmed. Crow has scheduled a private meeting tonight at the VIP Lounge, 42nd floor, Sky Horizon Hotel. Purpose: transaction confirmation and transfer of classified documents. Time: 30 minutes after the party ends. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. At last, the prey was moving. The 42nd floor of Sky Horizon, a place favored by businessmen and politicians for off-the-record meetings. No logs, no cameras, no traces. That would be where he tightened the noose around his neck. She weighed her options. She could order the tactical team to move in now, but that would be a gamble. The evidence of the transfer was still too thin. If she arrested him before the meeting, he could deny everything, and the documents would vanish forever. But if she waited until after the meeting, there was a risk he'd erase all traces before she could act. This wasn't just a matter of timing, it was a test of a hunter's patience. Keeping her face calm, Eleanor walked slowly to a table near the window, where she could observe most of the hall. Crow was still chatting with a small group, his gaze occasionally drifting toward her, openly watchful. He knew she was watching, and he was waiting to see her next move. Suddenly, a loud laugh burst from the left side of the room, where Julia Thompson and Peter Lynch were chatting about luxury vacations. "Well, who would have thought Eleanor Shaw would show up here?" Julia said, her voice raised just enough for Eleanor to hear. "She used to be as quiet as a shadow. Now she looks like a spy." Peter laughed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Something's off. She's nothing like she used to be. Maybe it's just time that changed her," someone else chimed in, though their tone lacked conviction. None of them truly understood what Eleanor was doing, but all of them felt uneasy standing near her. Eleanor met their glances head-on, saying nothing, smiling at no one. Her silence was answer enough, and it only unsettled them further. Her earpiece crackled again. Surveillance spotted a suspicious male, approximately 1.8 meters tall, with black hair, exited the hall through the north service door, not on the hotel staff roster. Eleanor's focus shifted instantly. The north exit, an overlooked emergency route behind the bar. A waiter slipped out unnoticed at a high-security event? There could be only one reason. He wasn't really staff. She spoke quietly. "Follow him. Do not engage. I suspect he's one of Crow's men." Crow always one step ahead. He hadn't come alone, and now his operatives were starting to retreat. Eleanor breathed slowly. The picture was becoming clearer. Crow was staging the perfect performance, confidently standing in the spotlight, playing the hero, while his team silently cleared the battlefield behind the scenes. If she focused solely on him, she'd miss the ones doing the dirty work. She picked up her glass and walked slowly toward Crow. "Congratulations on your speech. Quite impressive," Eleanor said, her tone light. Crow turned, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Do you think so?" "Perhaps, but I still believe smart people shouldn't let the past control them." Crow chuckled softly, his eyes sharp as blades. "No, Eleanor, smart people turn the past into a weapon." She met his gaze directly. "Then I hope you won't forget tonight." Crow didn't answer, just took another sip of his scotch. In that moment, they both understood. This was the last night they would stand in the same room freely. Behind them, Kevin, the MC, stepped back on stage, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's take a group photo. Everyone, please gather in the center of the hall." The crowd began shifting forward, forced laughter returning like a desperate attempt to recapture normalcy. Eleanor moved slowly, watching who approached Crow, who kept their distance, who scanned the room cautiously. Every glance, every gesture was a clue. She knew the cracks were spreading. Geller's voice came through again. "The suspicious waiter has reached the underground parking lot. Facial recognition match, Michael Hayes, senior covert agent from Sigma, the underground financial network Crow is linked to." Eleanor's heart tightened. Michael Hayes, the operative who had disappeared from intelligence radars 2 years ago, now resurfaced disguised as a waiter. Crow wasn't just a lone criminal. He was a node in a larger network. She gave her orders quickly. "Shadow Hayes, but no engagement. We need to know who he's meeting. Priority is protecting the evidence." Things were moving faster than expected, but Eleanor kept her breathing steady. Back in the hall, the group photo was taken. Forced smiles, hands on shoulders, as if their past had been free of darkness. Crow stood at the center, his confident smile unshaken, like a king without a throne. Eleanor stood at the edge, her gaze never leaving him. When the flash faded, the crowd began to disperse. Crow gave a polite nod, then turned and walked toward the main exit, as if the night had been nothing more than a pleasant diversion. But Eleanor knew the real showdown was at Sky Horizon. She tapped her earpiece, her voice calm but firm. "All teams in position. Await final orders on the 42nd floor." The game was nearing its end, but who would make the final move? That remained to be seen. The 42nd floor of the Sky Horizon Hotel was bathed in pale yellow light, quiet and cold. Unlike the noisy hall below, this place held only a few scattered figures and hushed conversations, discreet enough to conceal their true intentions. Eleanor sat alone in a corner of the lounge, a small tablet with a secured screen before her. An investment agreement was open, a fake contract for an education fund bearing her name and that of an international charity. The document was perfectly crafted, with vague clauses designed to mask the flow of large sums of money, posing as a way for her to launder funds back against Crow. This was bait, a paper trap. While waiting for Crow to arrive, Eleanor sent the contract through a dummy, secure channel, but intentionally left a subtle encryption flaw. If Crow were truly watching her, he would spot it and attempt to breach it. It was the only way to test whether he was playing offense or simply defending. She didn't have to wait long. Just 15 minutes after the file was sent, the first reverse scan appeared. An anonymous IP pinged the data channel, probing for decryption. Geller's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We've detected a small-scale cyber attack from a server in Iceland. Military-grade encryption on the access. High probability it's Crow testing you." Eleanor gave a slight nod, unsurprised. Crow entered the room not long after. He tossed his coat onto a chair, his casual smile betraying no sign of tension. "Eleanor, I think it's time we have a real conversation." She nodded, calm. "About what?" Crow sat down across from her, poured himself a glass of whiskey. "About the future and about trust." He didn't mention the contract directly, but his eyes flicked toward the tablet on the table, as if he'd already read everything worth knowing. "Your education project is fascinating, but I wonder, why would someone like you so easily accept funding from someone like me?" The question didn't need an answer. It was a probe. Eleanor shrugged. "Maybe I need the money, or maybe I'm testing whether you're trustworthy." Crow smiled faintly. "The problem is, people who test me don't last long in the financial world." The air thickened for a moment. Eleanor understood. Crow had started to suspect. Elsewhere, Crow's technical team was working non-stop. He had hired an anonymous hacker, once pursued by European intelligence but never caught, to dig deeper into Eleanor Shaw's background. And within 20 minutes, the first result froze him in place. No Eleanor Shaw existed in any financial institution, educational organization, or corporate registry. No social media profiles, no standard tax records. Only one government-secured file encrypted at the highest level contained her name and a brief description. Director, National Intelligence Agency. Crow set his glass down, his gaze colder than ever. He'd been played. From the beginning, she wasn't some naive woman lost in the world of investments. She was the one who'd been hunting him for 3 years. A hunter who spoke little, but followed through to the end. Eleanor saw the change in his eyes. He knew. But she didn't retreat. Instead, she placed the tablet down and met his gaze. "So now you know who I am." Crow leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You hit it well, Eleanor. I almost believed you were truly clueless." She smiled faintly, offering no denial. He stayed silent for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen. A few seconds later, Eleanor received a message. No subject, no sender name, just a single sentence. "You hit it well, Eleanor, but not well enough." It was a declaration of war. He stood, adjusting his collar, his smile returning. "Did you think you were the only one with a plan? Don't forget, I've survived this long because I know how to flip the board." Eleanor didn't rise, simply watched him. "Where are you going?" Crow gave a faint laugh. "To meet the next player, someone you can't control." He left the room, the door closing softly but coldly behind him. Eleanor exhaled quietly. The game was no longer about who was hunting whom. It was about who would reveal their hand first. Geller's voice broke in. "Confirmed, Crow is heading to the rooftop. He may be meeting another contact or planning his escape." Eleanor stood, packing away the tablet. "Follow him. Don't engage yet. I need to know who's waiting up there." Stepping out of the lounge, Eleanor felt it clearer than ever. This chess match had grown far beyond a simple criminal investigation. This was a battle between two people who knew the rules and chose to break them. Crow glanced at his watch. The rooftop meeting was approaching, and his instincts warned him he shouldn't linger in this room a second longer. He could feel it clearly. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer a space of shallow laughter and empty chatter. It had become a maze, and the exits were slowly sealing shut. Adjusting his suit, he walked toward the door. But just a few steps away from the threshold, a voice rang out, steady and cold. "Daniel, before you leave, don't you think you owe us a few closing words?" The entire room turned toward Eleanor Shaw, the woman who had remained silent all night, now speaking for the first time. Crow stopped. In that brief moment, he weighed his options: refuse and leave immediately, or stay a little longer, keeping his normal facade to ease suspicion. Then he smiled. A confident, unshaken smile. Crow turned and walked toward the stage with the poise of a natural speaker. He didn't fear Eleanor's gaze, nor the trap she was setting. He believed he still controlled the game. He took the microphone, adjusted the volume, and swept his eyes over the crowd. "Some say I succeeded because of luck. Others think I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But let me be honest with you." He paused, smiling wider. "Success has nothing to do with luck." A few people chuckled, waiting for what came next. Crow locked eyes with Eleanor as if speaking to her alone. "True power, my friends, doesn't come from degrees, titles, or social rules. It comes from breaking the limits others set for you." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned in discomfort. Crow shrugged and continued. "We've lived too long in beautiful cages, told what to do, what to believe, and what to feel guilty about. But how many of you have ever asked, who built that cage in the first place?" He paused, then lowered his voice, sharp and mocking. "Only the weak need rules to protect themselves. The strong? They make their own rules." The air grew heavy. The earlier laughter dissolved into tense silence. Eleanor tightened her earpiece. While Crow spoke, the tactical teams moved into position. Geller's voice came through swiftly. "Team 1, main entrance, ready. Team 2, west exit, ready. Team 3, south balcony, ready." House lights awaiting blackout signal. All they needed was her command. On stage, Crow raised his glass, finishing his speech with one last arrogant flourish. "This world doesn't belong to the rule followers. It belongs to those smart enough to break it." He took a sip, wearing the smile of someone who thought he'd already won. Eleanor gave no reply. She simply tapped her earpiece. Immediately, the lights cut out. A dense darkness enveloped the hall. The quiet hum of the ventilation filled the silence. The sound of hurried, shallow breathing echoed in the blackness. Then, red laser beams swept across the room, slicing through the shadows. A low, commanding voice rang out over the intercom. "This is the National Intelligence Agency. Everyone remain still. Do not move." The crowd froze in panicked silence. No one dared scream, only gasps and trembling hands filled the air. Crow stood calmly on the stage, betraying no surprise. He set his glass down, adjusting his cufflinks. In the darkness, his eyes found Eleanor's, illuminated faintly by the red lasers. They stared at each other, sharing a moment no one else could understand. He smiled faintly, as if whispering, "The final round, Eleanor." Agents swept in from every exit, sealing off the room. Several individuals from the crowd, those who had been subtly watching Eleanor all night, were dragged out, revealed as nodes in Crow's network. Eleanor signaled for the teams to hold position. Crow wasn't under arrest yet. She needed him to hand over the final piece of evidence. His words alone weren't enough. In the dark, Crow lowered the mic and stepped down from the stage, walking straight toward Eleanor. He stopped in front of her, speaking softly, just loud enough for the two of them. "You think I didn't know what you were preparing? Unfortunately for you, you're a little late." Eleanor stared directly at him. "This game isn't over." Crow smiled. "No, it's only just begun." At that moment, her earpiece crackled urgently. "Secondary target, Agent Hayes, just left the parking garage. He's carrying the device with the transaction data." Crow knew. He'd only needed to stall Eleanor for a few more minutes, while Hayes slipped away with the evidence. Eleanor made a split-second decision. Arrest Crow immediately or chase Hayes? Before she could choose, Crow added, "Go ahead, arrest me if you want. You won't find anything. And he's already gone dark." Eleanor didn't reply. She signaled for Crow to be held in place, but not cuffed yet. Then she spoke quietly into her earpiece. "External teams block the parking garage. Don't let him get far." The house lights snapped back on. The crowd stood frozen, pale and confused. The party was over. No one could maintain their polished facade. Crow glanced around, the same confident smile still on his lips. He whispered, "Eleanor, you should know. Capturing a pawn doesn't end the game." Eleanor said nothing, because she knew he was right. But this time, she intended to rewrite the rules herself. The lights snapped back on, cutting through the heavy darkness in the hall. People squinted, dazed and disoriented. The whispers were gone, replaced by suffocating silence. Agents in black tactical gear and bulletproof vests formed a tight perimeter at every exit. Some guests still stood frozen, unable to grasp what was happening. Others, who understood, quietly edged backward, trying to hide the fear in their eyes. On stage, Crow remained still, his expression unchanged, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Eleanor walked slowly toward the stage, her gaze locked on Crow. Each step echoed through the quiet room, like the toll of an ending bell. Crow broke the silence first, his voice calm. "So, Eleanor, what's the plan? Turn me into a criminal right here in front of everyone? That's rather ungraceful of you." She stopped a few steps away. "You didn't need me to turn you into anything, Crow. You did that yourself." Crow gave a casual shrug, feigning nonchalance. "Then by all means, show your evidence. Or is this all just theory?" The tension was razor sharp. People exchanged uneasy glances, hardly daring to breathe. Eleanor gave a slight nod to Agent Geller. He stepped forward and activated a small recording device, linking it to the room's sound system. A crisp, cold voice filled the hall. "Transfer the entire sum to Zurich. It'll be done in 30 minutes. If there's a problem, use the Panama route as backup." The voice, undeniable, belonged to Daniel Crow. The crowd froze in stunned silence. Crow kept his thin smile. "Well, a voice recording. That's easy. AI can fake anything these days. You know that." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. The voice was captured by the hotel's internal microphone system, right when you were standing by the bar surrounded by your old friends, not our equipment. She paused. "And the timestamp matches the financial transaction signal sent from your encrypted phone." For the first time, Crow's eyes narrowed. A flicker of something colder crossed his face. Eleanor gave the signal. 2 agents moved forward and cuffed him. The entire hall fell dead silent. Those who had applauded Crow earlier stood frozen, none daring to step forward in his defense. The polished social smiles of before turned to stone. Crow tried to maintain his arrogance, his voice rough. "Eleanor, you're playing with fire. Do you think taking me down ends this?" Eleanor didn't answer. She knew that question didn't require one. Not yet. Crow was led off the stage. His steps were slow, head held high, as if this were a victory parade, not an arrest. But as his eyes swept over the crowd, he was already searching. Who would carry on in his place? Geller's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Hayes' device is secured in the parking garage, data extracted, all transactions confirmed." Eleanor exhaled quietly. The final piece had fallen into place. In the stillness, a soft voice spoke from the back rows. It was Julia. She whispered almost to herself. We misjudged her for 20 years." Peter Lynch stood beside Julia, silent. His gaze on Eleanor changed. No longer dismissive, but not yet respectful either. It was the bewilderment of realizing that the person they had once looked down on was now the strongest presence in the room. Eleanor didn't care. She turned toward the crowd, her voice steady, not loud, but filling the space. "The event ends here. From now on, the hotel is under security review. If you're not involved, please cooperate with the investigation. And if anyone thinks they can run, feel free to try." No one moved. Crow was escorted out, his tall frame casting a long shadow that now seemed much smaller. He glanced back at Eleanor one last time, offering a final smile. "This game isn't over, Eleanor. This is just round 1. Eleanor met his gaze, silent. Because she knew he was right. The lights in the hall dimmed to a softer glow. Slowly, the crowd dispersed in small, subdued groups, no one speaking. The party, or rather the stage for deception, had finally fallen silent. Eleanor stood alone, staring at the space where Crow had delivered his final monologue. Every step tonight had been calculated, and yet an emptiness spread within her. No triumph, no satisfaction, because in this kind of war, victory is never complete. Geller approached quietly. "This part's done, but his financial network, it's probably deeper than we thought." Eleanor nodded. "Keep tracing it, one by one. He fell, but his empire hasn't collapsed yet. Geller sighed. You holding up? Eleanor didn't answer right away. After a pause, she simply said, I'm fine, but it's not over. Her footsteps echoed alone as she left the hall, leaving behind a shattered world of pretense. Eleanor walked slowly through the grand doors of the hall. The bright lights behind her faded, leaving only truncated whispers and stunned gazes she no longer bothered to acknowledge. Her heels tapped lightly against the marble floor, each step erasing the 20 years that separated her from those who once laughed at her, dismissed her, and treated her like a shadow that didn't exist. But now, she no longer needed their gaze to define her. A few people tried to catch up to her, but they only dared to follow from a distance. Their late-coming respect was not enough to break through the invisible wall she had built long ago. She could hear their awkward whispers trailing behind. She's the director of intelligence? How could it be her? What have we done with the last 20 years? Well, but Eleanor did not stop. She didn't need their admiration. She certainly didn't need apologies from those who never bothered to say her name. Her shadow stretched down the long hallway where the lights softened, and only the sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. But then, a hesitant yet firm voice called out behind her. Eleanor, wait! She stopped, not turning back, just stopping. The voice belonged to Peter Lynch. He jogged up, breathless, his eyes a mixture of awkwardness and sincerity. Maybe you don't need to hear this, but I have to say it anyway. Eleanor remained silent. Peter swallowed hard and continued. Back then, I acted like an idiot. We all did, not just me. We looked down on you, just because you were quiet, just because you weren't like us. He paused, his gaze faltering. Now I realize silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you saw farther than we ever could. Eleanor finally turned her head, her eyes neither angry nor forgiving. Simply calm, like someone who no longer carries wounds from the past. She smiled faintly, thin as morning mist. Peter, I've never needed anyone's recognition. I never lived my life waiting for someone else to validate it. Her answer left Peter speechless. He didn't know what to say, only lowered his gaze to the cold marble floor. Eleanor turned away, continuing, leaving behind a past that had finally closed its door. At the end of the corridor, where only the faint yellow light shone on the marble tiles, another figure stepped from the shadows. It was Agent Thomas Reed, head of strategic analysis. He stood tall, his face serious. Gone was the lightness of their briefings before. Madam Director, he said, voice steady, emotionless. Eleanor gave a slight nod, her pace unbroken, asking softly, Report. Thomas walked alongside her, his steps in sync with hers. The operation to capture Crow was a tactical success, but strategically, foreign intelligence confirms the moment Crow was taken, part of his underground financial system triggered emergency protocols. Eleanor lifted her head slightly, unsurprised. They're not going down without a fight. Thomas's voice dropped lower. Exactly. A new cell is rising in Eastern Europe. And this time, it may not be about money laundering anymore. It may be about a group trying to reshape the global financial order. Eleanor stopped in front of the elevator, looking straight at Thomas. When does it begin? Thomas met her gaze, his voice sharp. It already has, madam. The moment you walked out of that hall, it began. The elevator doors opened, casting a cold silver light across the floor. Eleanor stepped in without looking back. Then let's begin. The doors slid shut, taking with them the woman who, 20 years ago, was forgotten at the back of the classroom. Now, no one could ignore her anymore. Behind the closed doors of the hall, the noise resumed, but it was only surface noise. Beneath it, a silent war had begun, one with no room for personal pride or belated respect. Only the pursuit of truth remained, and the cold, silent presence of real power. Perhaps the most frightening thing in life is not failure itself, but when the whole world believes you are destined to fail forever. They once laughed at Eleanor Shaw throughout her youth, treating her like a shadow lost in the noise of the crowd. But in silence, she built something they could never understand: resilience. Not power written on paper, but silent power, the kind that can bring down an underground financial empire with a single command. Daniel Crow, the man who once manipulated markets and thought himself the author of new rules, was ultimately brought down not by an army, but by the one woman he always underestimated. So what's the lesson here? Never underestimate those who are silent. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones seeing further than anyone else. And never forget, true power doesn't come from making others bow before you. It comes from not needing anyone's approval, yet still leaving them no choice but to acknowledge you. If it were you standing before those who once belittled you, what would you do? Would you forgive or show them your true strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective from wherever you are in the world. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to hit subscribe so we can meet again in the journeys ahead, where truth, resilience, and wisdom will face even greater challenges to come.